Hello, everyone. My name is Butch Thomas, and today I would like to discuss a topic about practice regimen for the serious musician. Now, this pertains to all instruments. There's different warm-up approaches, but in particular, since I am a woodwind player, I'm going to talk about long tones, and that goes for anybody that plays brass or woodwind instruments. Okay, this is talking about having command of your instrument, where you can play loud or soft at a given moment when it's appropriate. Now, when you are playing in ensembles, whether large or small, there's going to be a lot of dynamic factors. And that's what makes the music effective. So what I do when I first begin to practice, I do long tone exercises. I put the metronome on 60. Now it's a total equal of 12 beats. 6 from triple piano to triple forte, back down to triple piano, the latter 6 beats. It sounds like this. Now, when you warm up or when you practice, that's the first thing you should do over the whole instrument, from the lowest note to the highest note, back down. Now, this is going to take you approximately about 20 minutes to do in its own. Now, your practice time for the serious musician should be a few hours a day. Not just 1, not just 2, but devote your time. And I don't want you to think about the time when you were practicing. Take your watch off, first of all. Get into your studies. This is what I call a growth practice. The growth practice is when you are stepping into the unknown and you are learning about something new. Always strive to do something new. Now, along with your long tones, after you've done that for about 20, 30 minutes, then you do your scales. Your majors, your minors, pure, Dorian minors, pure, and your Mixolydian scales. So after you've done these 2 things, come your interval exercises. You can take any kind of standard or tune, whether it's original or an older song, and exercise in intervals. Practice each chord in thirds. Once you have gotten the mastery of that, then practice each chord in the interval of fourths. This is going to open up your mental capacity and give you more freedom of command when you take a solo. So if you are going to be doing these things, as far as like the intervals and the scales, you must be well versed or have a great familiarity with these theoretical things, because it leads to a bigger picture. Now, along with improvisation, I highly, highly recommend, and I've said this before, one should always find a mentor or a teacher to study with or to be coached. No one's ever too good for that. So invest your time in somebody that's going to give you good guidance. Along with that, are technical exercises. Now, my experience and my preference and what I've learned throughout the years, and I've been doing this for about 40 years, my exercise choice is Henry Closet, the 25 Daily Exercises. Now, I've had this book most of my musical career, and a lot of people have studied this book. I got this book from my father, who was a musician. Charlie Parker used to study this book, along with many other greats. This book gives you the facility of finger combination, which gives you, if you practice it slow, it develops your speed. I advise anyone who is practicing or learning anything, it doesn't matter if it's a song or an exercise or any of that, start slow. Slow is good. It's not about ego. It's not about making mistakes, because if you're practicing, that's why you're practicing. You're supposed to make mistakes so you can learn.
Hey Butch, what was the name of that book again?
It's called The 25 Daily Exercises by Henry, Henri, Closet, capital Klose with an accent mark.
Thank you.
That's very, very important in your growth. Do everything slow, because that way you can mentally comprehend what you are doing, along with listening to yourself as you go along doing this. Listen to every little note. Make sure all your notes are clean and clear at all times. Raise the bar and never accept any kind of like fluff, is what I call it. Notes that you are not supposed to play in the note. Sure, or any of that kind of thing, if that makes any sense. Okay. So you have Closet or you have Rubank. It's a standard book that most young people use in schools. They have the elementary, they have the advanced, and they also, before the advanced, they have the intermediate methods, which are also great books, but the Closet is more of a specialty book. Highly recommended. The 25 Daily Exercises, once you get them, it should take you 25 minutes. When you first start going through this book, it's going to take you a couple of hours until you've developed the speed. Once you get the speed and go back to improvisation, you will definitely notice a difference in your technique and your playing. You'll have more freedom, you'll have more clarity. But you have to be disciplined, because this is a lifestyle. This is not just a hobby. For some it is, but speaking from my own experience, music is my lifestyle, because there's so much to devote to it if you're going to be on the level. So dream. Always dream. I encourage you to dream. I've gotten some great opportunities from dreaming, but you have to deliver the goods, which is your preparation. Now, the first half of my practice, I do technical studies. The second half of my practice, I do creative studies, which involves chordal studies based off of improvisation, learning and creating melodic sequential passages or patterns. Some people call them licks. But you have to understand how to apply these things. They might sound great and everything, but if you know how to place them, you can make them more effective. And when you do pattern, learn them in all 12 keys at all times. Also, based on my choral studies that I would advise people to do, is musical improvisation. And you could choose, first of all, I would do 100 choruses of the blues for my practice. You can pick any key you want. You can do all keys if you want, and that's better. But do 100 choruses. This way it starts to get the cobwebs out of your mind. And it teaches you how to create with your imagination a little bit more. And also for the serious player, along with these things, is preparation. Develop a repertoire of music as you go along. Always start out simple. Go up the ladder until you feel comfortable with more challenging things, but always grow. That is the most important thing, is growth. Some of the repertoire that I would suggest for a serious player, and I'm not going to talk about giant steps and all that kind of stuff. You know, that's great, but there's a lot of other things. And the most important thing is that when you are preparing, do it in the spirit of contributing, not to impress, not to use your gift as a weapon, but actually grow so you can contribute to the world. Whether we're talking about music here, but with everything that you do, but contribute to the world through your studies. There's going to be up and coming people underneath you that are looking at you, wanting to know what you know. So it's a responsibility in the big picture of things. It's a big responsibility to do the best you can as far as being a serious player. Are there any questions?
Butch, I have a question. You mentioned the book with the 25 daily practice routines. In your own sort of practice regimen, do you still routinely follow those 25 techniques or methods?
Absolutely. Let me tell you a story. I hated that book for 20 years. I burned my first copy my father gave me because I didn't want to practice. So years gone by and I started teaching. I got into the book and I realized what the importance was of studying this book. And this is a book you never outgrow. So I still practice this. And yeah, it's something that I will always do. Out of all the books that I have, this is one of my most valuable ones.
Would it be out of bounds to ask you to illustrate maybe a couple of the types of things you would find in that book that people watching today could take away from?
I'd have to go get the book. It's in my shelf.
Okay. Or maybe some other methods that you do regularly each day, not necessarily in the book, that could be helpful to become part of someone's regular routine.
Well, I'll be happy to go get the book.
Okay.
It will take just a second. This is my close-up book. I practiced so much the cover came off, and I had to tape the bindings after a lot of years. Okay, well, number one in the book, I'm going to do this rather medium tempo. It's a scale-based exercise. Number one is it's based off of the C major scale. The other ones, they go into intervals, as I was speaking earlier about thirds. It goes into intervals of fourth exercises. And once you get these under your fingers slowly, you increase the speed, as I said before.
Butch, we have another question from John who's asking, where do you get the patterns, licks to practice? Just from listening to recordings?
I used to. That's how I first started. Then I did an intense study for a couple of years of Charlie Parker when I was in school. I had the Omni book, and I used to practice the Omni book 6 hours a day. And I got the records, I got so fluent with it and memorized the solos that I could play along with the records. I would go to the record store and find out what Verve copy it was. He was on the Verve label. And eventually I was able to keep up with the recordings. And so I memorized pretty much of the Omni book, and I started learning things, and I knew licks. I studied the Oliver Nelson book at the same time. I knew licks, but I didn't know how to apply them. So when I got with Jaco Pastorius, he heard me reciting the Omni book one day, and I thought I had everybody snowed over, right? Jaco came up to me and he said, why don't you start learning your own stuff? I was like, well, I got snagged on that, so I might as well start learning my own stuff. So Jaco used to sit me down. He was like one of my teachers. He used to sit me down at the piano all the time and show me how to solo over things, over chords. He would play the chord and tell me what to play. So I would learn that in all 12 keys. And that's how I basically learned lines. Then I had friends like Alex Foster, who's like my brother. He plays on Saturday Night Live, plays alto. And he was one of my greatest mentors too, along with Michael Brecker. So as a young guy, I was about 22 at the time when I started doing this. This is how I acquired throughout the years, little by little, about learning about phrasing. I don't like to call it licks. These are phrases, just like when you speak to somebody. I hope that makes some, that question a little bit clearer.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned a couple of resources in that answer. You talked about the Omni book, and you mentioned something by Nelson. What can you elaborate on what those books are for someone who may not be familiar?
Okay, now this is the very first book that I ever had received. My father gave me this book. I didn't know what to think, heads or tails, because I didn't even know how to read music back then that well. It's called The Patterns for Jazz, by Oliver Nelson.
The Patterns for Jazz by Oliver Nelson.
Yes.
Okay. And so tell me a little bit more about that book. How is that book presented, and is it still available?
Yes. I think you can find it through Jamie Aebersold now.
Okay. You also mentioned as part of your practice routine that a portion of it was more technical, and then you switch to a more creative portion of it. So,
Yes.
so what if you how do you what do you do as part of a creative sort of practice regimen? What sort of tips, methods, ideas can you lend to people that are watching today to help them in that type of creative process?
Okay, well, as I've mentioned before, your creative studies have to be chordal studies based on improvisation. And you're learning and creating a lot of sequential patterns in the process. Improvising over standards. If you create, if you write, I encourage that a whole lot. That's where the money's at, in the writing, eventually. Learn how to solo over different things. Learn how to solo over the different forms. There's a 12-bar blues. There's a blues with a diminished chord in it. There's your basic 1-4-5 blues, which I touched on last week. There is lots of different things that you can solo over. That's why I encourage you to play 100 courses of the blues every day as a warm-up. Then you do all these other things and develop your repertoire of songs. And the most important thing that I want to stress on is transposition. Now, if you're a B-flat player, you're going to transpose up a whole step. If you are an E-flat player, you're going to transpose up a minor third or a sixth. Learn how to sight read. The fake book for us is a good example. Learn how to sight read the concert keys and transpose at the same time. This is going to develop your eyes. And one last thing I want to touch on is double timing. Now, this is a dying art for jazz players. Double timing just means that you're going to double your tempo when you are soloing. If the tempo's here, that's double timing, as opposed to so learn a facility. This is what the Closé book is all about. This is one of the reasons Charlie Parker could play so good double time, and Coltrane. So if you do these things on a daily basis, your playing will greatly improve. And there's so much to talk about. You know, I teach lessons, and if you would like to study musical concepts, if you're a guitar player or bass player or piano player or whatever, I'm here. If you want to take technical saxophone lessons or flute lessons, I am available. So feel free to contact me, and I'd love to hear from you.
So Butch, couple things because I know we're getting a little short on time, and we have two other great sessions scheduled for today, which I'll comment on in a second. But you're going to be back with us on June 4th and again on June 15th, and both of those sessions are divided into two parts, and they're titled "Learning Head Charts: Beginning Jazz Standards Part 1 and Part 2." What can you share as sort of a snapshot as to the type of approach you plan to have with those upcoming sessions?
Basically, learning tunes from memory with no sheet music in front of you. The approach that I like to use as far as learning songs like this is doing them in sections. So what we're going to talk about is the A section, the B section, and the C section, or whatever kind of arrangement it is. So this is basically what we're going to talk about.
No, we definitely look forward to that. Again, that's on June 4th and June 15th. We also have created a link next to your topic today to our Clearwater Jazz Holiday Spotify channel, and we put a couple songs in that link for people to reference, and we plan to add to it as we go forward with you in other sessions. Can you comment on the tracks that we put in that playlist so far today, and any relevance they might have to the topic today?
Absolutely. The two songs that I recommended to listen to were dedicated primarily to double timing technique. One is called Blue Train by John Coltrane, where he mixes double time and swing 2 and 4 together. Another good song that I had recommended was called Kim by Charles Parker. This also represents a perfect example of double time. Now, if you're not familiar with the term double time, once again, it's basically just playing fast, but you're doing it within a context of tempo and time. So this is what we're going to start talking about next week, as far as after we start, listen to the double time things.
That's great, Butch. Well, we're really happy to have you involved with these sessions. You bring some really interesting topics to the table, and a wealth of experience. So we really appreciate that.
Well, if you're real serious about what you're doing, make sure you have a quality practice or quality preparation, because your key is preparation to be able to do big things. Don't settle for being just good. The enemy of good is great. So be great. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.